So Liu Xiaobo was a Chinese citizen that was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010, making him one of very few Chinese citizens to accept an award up to this day. Liu Xiaobo was a brilliant and very intellectual man that expressed his feelings for a greater good of China regardless of the harsh treatment he received. He was born in December 28, 1955 in Changchun, China, to a highly intellectual family. In 1969, Xiaobo was taken by his father to Inner Mongolia as a part of the Down to the Countryside movement and eventually relocated to a farm in Jilin Province to work. This movement was for young Chinese citizens who were raised in the city to relocate to rural areas of China to work with laborers. By 1982, he graduated from Jilin University with a bachelor's degree in Chinese literature, and in 1984, he completed his master's in literature at Beijing Normal University and started working as a lecturer there. He eventually went on to get his doctorate, and his thesis ended up being published as a book. These were some of the major accomplishments that occurred early on in his life to inaugurate a highly successful and meaningful career as a human rights activist. The Tiananmen Square Massacre was a huge event that took place in Liu Xiaobo's life. This massacre occurred from mid-April of 1989 until the beginning of June of that same year. It began as a non-violent protest to demand personal freedom and a democratic government, which was different from China's communist government during this time period. It was stated students were exposed to Western values and demanded personal freedoms and democracy. It was a horrific decimation that ended with many innocent lives being taken by soldiers who were equipped with lethal weapons such as tanks and machine guns. Historian Tim Brooke argues that the military crackdown is a massacre, noting that using combat weapons against unarmed citizens was a moral failure. This statement is completely true, considering it is cruel that one side have more power than the other to defend themselves. Also, there is a man known as Tank Man who stood in front of the tanks on June 5th and became a symbol of the power for the powerless. This image symbolizes the many innocent lives that were taken due to peaceful protests that turned gruesome. The official ruling for the military crackdown was that it annihilated a riot that otherwise would have threatened China's stability and prosperity. To this day, Tiananmen Square Massacre is a taboo in China and is banned in all forms of media. Xiaobo had a major impact in the ending results of the Tiananmen Square Massacre. Prior to this massacre, he was in the United States, but ended up traveling back to China to make part in the protest and organize a hunger strike to support the student demands. However, when the protest turned to a violent attack by the military, he offered to help remove students from the protest and forego any more brutal homicides by the Chinese military. As a result of his bravery and guidance, thousands of Chinese citizens avoided merciless murder because of Xiaobo's negotiation to end the protests in peace. However, Xiaobo felt a lot of guilt for being a coward and fleeing to safety instead of staying with those students while the military was firing aimlessly to make them retreat. He was scarred by the lives that were lost in the massacre, saying images of the souls of the dead haunted him, and that June of 1989 had been a major turning point in his life. The actions he took in the Tiananmen Square Massacre saved thousands of lives, but the ones that he saw brutally murdered affected him for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, Liu Xiaobo was arrested on June 5, 1989 for his involvement in the students' protest and was detained in prison. According to the book No Enemies, No Hatred, the regime's judgment of Liu's involvement at Tiananmen Square was that he had been a black hand behind a counter-revolutionary riot. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding because Xiaobo was only trying to help lead a peaceful protest, and when the protest converted to a violent massacre, he attempted to end it harmoniously. 3 months after Liu's arrest for his participation in the protest, he was expelled from Beijing Normal University and all his writings were banned. However, after the news was released, instead of retiring from writing, he continued as an underground writer while detained in prison. Sadly, this was not the only time that Liu Xiaobo was arrested for his actions and writings about human rights activism. He was arrested again in 1995 for his writings while he was in prison for the Tiananmen Square Massacre and was sentenced to 3 years in labor camp. Labor camps were used as a way of detention for Chinese citizens that disobeyed the government's authority. It is speculated that his best poems were written while he was detained in labor camp. Yet again, this did not halt Liu Xiaobo's passion for expressing the need for being a human rights activist. Once he was released from labor camp in 1999, he continued working on various projects through writing and speaking how he felt about the Chinese government and the need for a change to democratic ruling. In the 21st century, he began working with several other Chinese human rights activists on a document titled Charter 08. These writers got the idea of Charter 08 from a political document released by Czechoslovakia by Václav Havel, when they were governed by the Soviet Union. Liu Xiaobo had a huge impact on the success of Charter 08 and influenced over 10,000 Chinese citizens to sign the document. Václav Havel was a major inspiration to Xiaobo because of his passion for human rights and giving the people of his country the best governing body. After being detained in labor camp for his writings, Liu Xiaobo was arrested for the third and final time in 2009. The final time he was arrested was due to his efforts and contributions to Charter 08. It became the main piece of evidence against him in the criminal trial, even though he did not originate it. His friends had been working on the draft for several months in 2008 before he joined them. However, he ended up taking full responsibility for Charter 08 so that his peers would not suffer the cruel punishment of imprisonment. He insisted that Charter 08 was not a petition to the government, but rather it was a route for individuals to disclose shared ideals to one another. Xiaobo was sentenced to 11 years in prison, which surprised many observers who thought the severity of the punishment was harsh. The official ruling for his arrest was for incitement of subversion of state power, which occurred on June 23, 2009. This is where he would end up passing away due to unfair treatment and unethical resistance to give Liu Xiaobo medical treatment for liver cancer. Liu Xiaobo had a very influential and successful career despite suffering from several imprisonments. He ended up returning to China in May of 1993 despite being forewarned by his friends. In spite of his detention periods, he continued to write and publish several books and essays. Xiaobo states that the Chinese love to look up to the famous, thereby saving themselves the trouble of thinking. This shows that Xiaobo got the impression that Chinese citizens will follow what authorities enforce even if it is unethical. Liu Xiaobo thoroughly enjoyed writing, and though he continued writing, his internet connections and telephone conversations were taped by police to make sure he wasn't conspiring to transform the Chinese government. Liu Xiaobo also wrote many poems and dedicated them to his second wife. One of the poems was titled Your Lifelong Prisoner. A part of the poem states, "My dear, I'll never give up the struggle for freedom from the oppressor's jail, but I'll be your willing prisoner for life. I'm your lifelong prisoner, my love. I want to live in your dark inside, surviving on the dregs of your blood." This shows that Liu Xiaobo was even willing to give up spending time with his wife to make a fight for freedom known throughout China. He was willing to express his beliefs and feelings while actually risking his own freedom. Liu Xiaobo was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on October 8, 2010 for the nonviolent human rights struggle in China. However, China did not want him to accept the award because of his battle to change the Chinese government to a democracy. The Nobel Prize Committee left an empty chair at the acceptance ceremony because they believed he deserved recognition, for which upset the Chinese government. There were many people that spoke highly of Liu Xiaobo and the influence he had on Chinese citizens. Louisa Greaves stated, "He created a true legacy of flesh and blood human beings, people inspired by him, but also shaped and molded by the aspirations he articulated, and just as importantly, the evidence of working together to build ideas, build institutions, and work on practical problems." Another individual stated, "It's clear that it was the activist Liu Xiaobo, in addition to the writer and poet Liu Xiaobo, the peaceful actions he took in sowing the seeds for democratic change that terrified China's authoritarian leaders. These are two individuals who had the highest regards for Liu Xiaobo and the work he did to make China a better place for everyone living there. As with any other person or historic moment, there are always critics as well as people who are supportive of the person or situation. This is no different than Liu Xiaobo's case. There are many Chinese citizens who are inspired by his actions and bravery. However, the government officials disliked all that Liu Xiaobo did to try to change the Chinese government to a democracy. I fully support the work of Liu Xiaobo and all he did throughout his lifetime to help improve the Chinese government and give the citizens more freedom. He sacrificed so much of his life to speak up for human rights and the need for change in the government. I think that his bravery and promotion of human rights paved way for others to promote human rights like he did. This allowed for further battle with the government to allow Chinese citizens more freedom than they previously had. I think he is more than deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010 for his ruthless efforts put towards leaving China in a better place than when he was born. It's unfortunate that China did not allow Liu Xiaobo to accept the award because they thought it was disgraceful to the Chinese government. I think that it was admirable that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee left an empty chair for Liu Xiaobo in 2010 when they awarded the prizes. All in all, I think Liu Xiaobo was an impeccable model to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for all of his work as a human rights activist in China.